Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. This is Tyler. I'm a tech specialist here on the Fusion 360 stream. Um, you've probably seen me in a couple of these at this point. I've been moderating a few, so hopefully my name's becoming more familiar to you. If not, I'm interested on why you're here, clicking on such a ridiculous thumbnail. But regardless, today we're going to be talking a little bit about architecture, sort of. Any actual architect should probably turn away from this conversation. I don't think I've ever actually been accused of being an architect. But yeah, this project will kind of err on the side of architecture. Autodesk has more than one architectural design solution, and usually Fusion is towards the bottom of that list, but in many cases, it's just the right tool for the job. I have many customers who are using Fusion 360 in their architectural design workflow, and many more who actually ask about it. Admittedly, Autodesk has a better software for the solutions for this project, but this is a real project that I worked on, and I know Fusion. And in my context, Fusion is the absolute perfect tool for this job. So to kind of preface this project, it's pretty application specific. Again, this is something that I recently worked on, but I hope to answer questions that many of you have about your similar projects through this workflow. So let's see, I have some notes here. What was the kind of problem for my client? What was this project? Well, a local non-for-profit was renovating the interior of a 50 by 25-foot greenhouse. I have relationships with people who are on the board of that non-for-profit, and they asked if I could help. So what they wanted was nothing structural, but they intended to purchase new equipment and furniture, run external piping in some places, and rearrange existing furniture inside the greenhouse. So how do they know what they can fit? Right? They obviously know like the interior dimensions of this greenhouse, but there's going to be a variety of like 20 or 30 different pieces of furniture inside of there. How do those all work together? Right? It's a pretty complex puzzle. How do they get a feel for the usability of the space and different arrangements? It's like, oh, all right, well, maybe Fusion can help. I have some good ideas for this. So I went to the job site and I'm going to share my screen so you can see a couple of my pictures. And pull my notes back up here. So when I went to the job site, I took some simple measurements. I took pictures of this space that exists. Um, I wanted to get a rough layout for what's already there, some obstructions that are going to get in the way of creating new things, get an idea for just how we wanted to put this space together. I both took manual measurements, and you'll see here I also used some of the like augmented reality tools to actually use some measurements here. This is fairly inaccurate, but it just gives me some perspective of scale. So if I did actually miss a measurement on something, say like an instance, these grow tables here, um, knowing the scale of the entire room or knowing the scale of something that's next to it can certainly help. This just kind of gives perspective of just that. I think this is just the Google Measure tool that I was using to get some of this. Additionally, I have some pretty rough sketches on a piece of paper sitting next to me that I took of the workspace, and then I have the notepad on my cell phone, pretty full of notes and things that I might need there. So um, let's uh, let's see how this all relates to Fusion. What I intend to do is rebuild with some fair accuracy the interior of this greenhouse inside of Fusion. Because ultimately, why this was a problem or why this needed to be solved was this board that I was communicating with wanted to make a pitch to say, hey, um, this is our budget. This is what we intend to do. Here's a representation of what we're hoping to change or the furniture that we intend to purchase or the structure inside of this greenhouse that we want to change, simply look at this design and say if you think that this is valid or not. Also, just is kind of a talking piece to the people, the growers in that greenhouse that have a more technical view of what they're trying to do, but need a way to represent that to these folks who maybe are a little bit less technical. Um, and then how does my design relate to all of that? Well, this is going to be presented to a group that has zero CAD experience. So how do I get this really like visually stimulating model into their hands and have it be beneficial? And then also through this coronavirus, how do I do that all remotely without actually being there in front of them, driving a computer, driving a presentation? Um, that part we'll save for the end of this. I think that Fusion has some really cool solutions for that. But let's just start designing. You'll have to excuse me too. I'm going to do the like cooking show trick here, where I'm going to build a small percentage of this. I'm going to kind of throw the model away and pull one out that is a little bit more developed, and then start working on that, and then throw that model away, and then pull one out that's a little bit more developed again. But again, the workflow is more important here than the actual design process, so I don't want to waste too much time on that. But let's start designing here. I'm going to get back to a better place in my data panel here, and I'm going to start by saving this project. Call it the greenhouse. Perfect. Now, I think the biggest part of a project of this scale is organization. And your understanding of components is a huge, huge part of that. Um, I've talked to a lot of different customers about creating floor plans, and they have scaled from like RV trailers to tiny homes to like just like sections of like really detailed sections of or like foundational pieces of the home. And it seemed to always come down to the same thing. It's like, well, how can I present this to someone else? How can I organize this so someone can jump into this project and view it efficiently? Um, Components are a huge part of that. So I'm going to start this off by kind of sorting my list of components. And I actually, in my real project as well, was just jotting down ideas on how I want this all to kind of flow and how I wanted this to be able to be viewed by the group. And again, my structure for components is going to decide that. So component number one, and this is where architects might start to laugh, but this worked really well for me. I'm going to call it structure. And that's going to contain roof, doors, vents, walls, and windows. I'm going to create another component, and you'll notice I activated this top level component to make sure that this one isn't nested inside of the next component. I'm going to call this furniture. And this is going to be for all of like the appliances, all of the pieces, all of the tables that are going to be going inside of the design here. And we're going to do one more, and we're going to call this plumbing. This one was a little bit less important, but it's something in this project that I ended up adding towards the end. And it was nice to be able to just isolate plumbing quick and easily. So that was perfect. Now, inside of structure, I actually like to create some subcomponents. So let's create another new component. Let's go through and call this one roof. Let's go through and make one called doors. And let's go through but for vents. And walls. And windows. Cool. So most of the organizing is done now. And is this absolutely necessary from the start? I kind of think so. Um, I mean, you can definitely get away with starting to create sketches, create bodies, and then converting those into components. But you'll have a lot of issue with your sketches sort of straying off to where like you'll see all of your sketches then in this top level assembly. And in some cases, you can drag those into the individual components and not have an issue with it. But in some cases, you can't do that. They have associativity with other things, and changing the location of the sketches can't, it just doesn't work. And then that makes it really difficult when you have a list of, I don't know, 25 different sketches under your top level assembly, and you have no idea what components they relate to. So the more organizing you can do from the start, the better. Um, in projects where I really just don't understand where I'm going, oftentimes, yeah, I just start creating bodies and I just start designing. And then in a lot of cases, I'll get like 25% done with the project that I've started. And I'll go back and almost restart the project because I think this part is so important. Like, okay, now I have scope of where I'm going. Let's go back and reorganize components and kind of start fresh, start again. So, um, any different workflows for this, but that's just kind of part of my preference. So I want to start with some of the walls. So let's make sure we have the walls activated here. And I'd also like to make sure that my units are set to what my actual practical measurements were. So we'll set to feet. We're looking good so far. Let's create a sketch. And I would like to center everything around this origin here. So I'm going to use a center rectangle. And I know that this is 50 by 25 feet. So that is kind of the interior wall dimension of this big old greenhouse. Now, I've already prefaced my lack of architectural knowledge. I'm going to make these walls half a foot thick. Some of that is based off of measurement. Some of it's just based off of aesthetic. I think that this will look good enough for me. Um, that's the good and bad at this project is actual structure, like interior detail of these walls doesn't matter. I mean, really, any detail of the structure doesn't matter unless it's an interference with furniture that's going to be placed inside of this project. So I could fudge some of these details. And this is also like really good example of like where fusion really thrives. Like you are trying to make quick concept of something. This really feels almost like a practical model that I'm building. Like if I was building this with like styrofoam board in real space, like it feels like the same level of detail as that, and it was supposed to represent the same level of detail as that as well. Not to say that you can't drive an actual floor plan in Fusion and have it actually be produced, but I thought that this project was perfect for this exactly. So this sketch is finished. I'm going to go through and extrude those walls. I think the highest height of this was 16 feet. And you guys can't see my notes, but again, they're here next to me. And now I wanted to start cutting some more detail into this. So I'm going to create a sketch on this face. I'll actually pull up some of these images here. What we're sketching on now is kind of this front face of the structure, and I want to cut these angles into the roof. So I'm going to draw some rough lines here. And in building this, I was doing this constantly where you unknowingly match to these certain endpoints or like kind of locking points here. At any point, you can hold control to ensure that these assists aren't assisting you because sometimes they cause more trouble than good. Or like if I've drawn this line and everything else looks right, but I know I don't want this midpoint, I can just simply select that icon, press delete on my keyboard, and now um, I'm not locked to that endpoint. So if I go through and dimension this, it won't be any problem. So I know that this length is 9.5 feet. I know that this here is 3.5 feet. I know that this here is 7.5 feet. Okay, that's good. While I'm in here, I think I'm actually going to add some detail for this door as well. So the door was roughly 7 feet tall. It was a double door that was 7.5 feet wide. And then foot from here. Right, that's looking awesome. I'm gonna say finish sketch. And now we're gonna use these close profiles to break through this entire design here. So that looks good. That looks good. That looks good. Let's make sure the distance is actually through all, just in case we make any changes later. That cut will affect the change in length of the structure. I don't know why I would ever do that, but sometimes your future self makes decisions that your previous self wouldn't estimate. So let's start there. I could probably go through and turn that sketch back on and cut this door out as well. That we don't want to go through the entire structure. We just want to have that go through the front here. All right, let's turn those off. And let's go through and create the roof. So this one might be a little bit more interesting. We're actually going to use one of the sketches off of my wall here. I'm going to use surfaces to drive this. So I'm going to use that other sketch that I created, and we are going to extend this minus 51 feet. So that's the interior dimension of that greenhouse plus the thickness of the walls. Say okay. And then maybe I want to add a thickness to this too. Again, the actual way this roof is constructed is less of interest to me than just representing it as some form of a roof. So I'm just going to say this is actually half a foot thick, just like the walls. And you'll see the way that this kind of extrudes out or thickens is kind of funny. It's extruding out normal to kind of the face that it's coming from. And I don't mind that, actually. I think that that looks fine for this structure. It doesn't look strange. That'll work for me. So what I'm going to do is actually turn that roof off so it's a little bit easier for me to work. And something that I really wanted to be able to do was for who's ever viewing this model to be able to turn an entire wall off so they can just view it a little bit easier. Just like I did with the roof. Maybe they want to keep that roof on, but they want to peer in one of these sides here. It would be really nice if they could just go through and turn an entire wall off. Well, as of right now, all of those walls are a solid, so let's break those apart. This is a good tip for people who are 3D printing and they want to split a bunch of surfaces and print things separately because it won't fit in a print bed. Using this split body tool, I can select the body that I want to split. I select a cutting surface that I want to cut from, and you'll see here that that's going to kind of use the plane of that wall to cut through those surfaces. And now I have that split line. That's exactly what I wanted. Quick trick to redo your last tool is I can just click with my right mouse button and drag upward. That will repeat the last command. We'll break these walls. That's great. So now under my walls component, I should have 4 different bodies. And we did such a good job of kind of naming all of these components. In some cases, naming these bodies might be just as useful. So I know that this wall here is a south-facing wall. So I'm going to say south there. I'll say north, east, and west. Be a little bit easier to reference down the line if there's a case where I do need to remove those. Let's put the roof back on and see how we're looking. Okay, good. I definitely have some more cutouts that I need to worry about. So I'm going to go through and create another sketch on this front surface here. And this will be a cutout for the windows. Let's jump back to the images we have here. So now we're going to be cutting out these windows here. For this portion, I'm not going to worry about kind of the structure that sits inside of it, these kind of support beams. And the ultimate design, that is something that I ended up building. But for here, I don't think it's going to be necessary. So looking down at my napkin sketch here, looks like the bottom of these windows start at 3.5 feet. This is 4.5 feet. Do what we did before to cut those windows out. You'll see that now these two components are broken apart. Um, is that a problem? No, not necessarily. Like you can see, they're still referencing each other. When I ultimately went through and built the final model of this, I had this kind of structures tying these two connections together, and it was actually one solid, so it was a little bit easier to turn off. But um, say this was kind of a headache for me, and I didn't want these two things separated. I could create a new component from this body, so now it's a subcomponent under walls. I could put both of those bodies in one subcomponent and very easily turn those on and off. So maybe I would then go through and do the same for all of these walls. But again, a lot of this is preferential and what's going to work best for you and in your application, and how your model is going to be used. Is it used for manufacturing? Is it used for just concept or just viewing? These are all sorts of things that you'd have to consider there. So let's go through and add the windows to the top of this. Let's cut out for the roof. To do that, I'm going to use the project tool, and I'm definitely to blame for using hotkeys and not explaining what I'm actually doing, but P on the keyboard brings up this project tool, and that's going to project geometry that's on a different plane to your plane. So I'm going to say OK. There we go. And now you can see kind of the outline of that project there. Let's make sure we're looking at that surface. Now what we can do is offset this. Let's say 1/2 foot. Actually, we'll say like 3/4 there. Finish this. Extrude this through to the other side. And there we go. So that's a pretty good start, right? This gives a pretty good perspective for that structure. If I did a side-by-side comparison, I think someone would be like, hey, that actually looks pretty similar to the thing on that picture. I take that as a compliment. Now, would more detail be beneficial to this model? Well, in the case of me designing this, I thought so. So I went through and added a little bit more detail. So let's put this model aside for now and pull the half-baked one out of the oven. And here we go. So as you see, very similar to the last one. The way that this is all organized is pretty similar to the last one. Ultimately, I decided that that nesting of all of those walls inside of another wall component was kind of unnecessary, and I just had everything associated with those individual walls as one component. So now I can go through here and turn an entire wall off and start to see what's inside of it. I also added these center post structures, which are, again, part of where I was saying before, like what is going to get in the way of the actual design of this whole project. Like what are the obstacles that I need to avoid? What's non-movable? What is permanent? And you can see these center posts are definitely that. I added some more detail of these vents because I wasn't sure if we were going to need to build anything around those or anything that's going to be referencing those. I added some additional doors here, and then just some coloring using the appearance menu to get a little bit better detail in this design. So the appearance menu is really, really easy to use. If you guys watched my rendering live stream last week, you got a pretty good preview of that. But you just have a kind of a library of different materials that you can go through and select. Like for instance, what did I pick for the walls here? So I use this 3D ash painted. So I think that's under wood solid, painted. Inside of here, I have a bunch of different wood materials. It's as simple as just pulling one of these materials up into your design and then dropping that onto whatever body, or you can select individual faces to apply that to, or then to be represented as that material. And you get kind of a simplified representation of it in the design workspace here. But if you ever pull this into rendering, you get texture maps and a lot more detail applied to that surface. I'm going to undo that for now. Again, you can see how I've applied those appearances to the rest of this project. Pretty representative of how it actually looks in reality. But again, this model doesn't really get us any closer to our goal of like, hey, we want to figure out ways to organize this the most optimal way. We also want to see what sort of equipment can actually fit inside of this space. So my next project was to go through and create a bunch of furniture. And the way that this is organized kind of goes back to that last conversation of how components should be organized. Um, your file hierarchy and conventions for file sorting are almost as important as the design. Being able to find your designs and sort your designs and making sure that you're on most current versions of things is obviously very, very important. So yeah, I try to make this as clean as I can. So all of the furniture that was in this list was just created by me. I used a lot of, again, these pictures for just reference material of what exactly I needed. Like you'll remember that that table I was pointing to initially. You can kind of see it in the corner here. I think I have a more detailed shot of it somewhere. Let's try and find that. Oh, we'll use this instead. This is some sort of Potter. Again, I had someone there from the board helping me saying like, hey, these are components that we want to keep. I would like to see these in the ultimate CAD design. Would you mind recreating this for us? So, okay, I see this green pot. I took some simple measurements of it. We'll pull this up. And very much like the greenhouse, I made this to the point where it was represented, but not exact. Like the actual footprint of this is represented, and the boundaries that it needs to have, and the interferences that it might have with other things will easily and accurately be represented from this model. But you see, it doesn't have like the caster wheels on it. This outside ring isn't even connected to the body, but that's fine. Again, this is just a representation of what needs to exist, not the actual like manufactured version of it. And I did that for a bunch of different details in here. I'm going to go through and maybe recreate this pad wall here because that was a pretty good example of something that I didn't have full detail for, but I had enough to create some sort of a representation for it. So this pad wall is apparently I'm not um, a greenhouse grower either. This is what's used to cool the space. Um, so that is a kind of permanent structure in the building. So that needed to be represented as well. That was going to be a boundary for how all of this other furniture was created. So I did kind of the bottom up approach for this instead of the top down design, where I started creating these components separate of the assembly so that I could drop these components in the assembly and move them around as necessary. Now, this pad wall is not a good example for that because it's not going to move. It's going to be a permanent fixture, but it's a good start to show exactly how I went through it and modeled some of this. So, okay, it looks like we are still in millimeters. Maybe inches would be better for this. And let me pull up some of my measurements. So, I have the pad wall. Now, this is where those images definitely come into play. So, I have one dimension saying that this is supposed to be 15 feet long, and I don't have any other dimension for this. So I'm going to go back to this model that I made, and I'm also going to pull up this image. And I can see that this hydro wall or pad wall reaches pretty close to the top of this roof structure here. Maybe it's about a foot down, I could estimate. So, how tall is that wall? Well, I have that marked down somewhere else, but maybe I don't want to reference it. Using inspection tools inside of Fusion makes this a little bit easier. So, I see that this is 7 feet tall. In that image, it's about a foot down from the roof. Let's call it 6 feet tall. I saw a scale of someone standing next to it. They're probably a little bit less than 6 feet, so I think that that will be fairly accurate. All right, good. So that's a start. I'm going to go through and extrude this out, let's say 1 foot. That looks pretty good. I'm going to pull up this image again for reference. Looks like there's kind of a wire frame that runs around the outside of it, and then this cardboard like corrugations that run to the interior of it, and then this kind of cylindrical catch at the bottom. Um, those are all the details I think I want to represent, so maybe we'll create that cylindrical catch at the bottom. Um, I might actually make this a little bit larger. Let's see. This is the value of not designing to exact precision, is that you can mock this stuff up super, super, super quick. And where I said in the beginning, where, yeah, there's probably a lot better, more precise architectural tools in the Autodesk library. Do I think that anything else exists that would allow you to design concept as quick as this? I don't know. I'm not sure. I really think Fusion might be the best option for this type of project. I think this is a kind of an interesting workflow, and a lot of my customers have said the same thing. It's like, yeah, the way that I design in Fusion is just like so free flow and like freehand and just like easy. Um, I I wish I could bring that into my architectural projects, and then they do. So I'm going to add just a little bit more detail to this. And do this to be the top here. Okay. Then I'm going to extrude this out, that out, and then we're going to go in both directions, and then we'll pull this through a little bit. And then I'm going to create another sketch on this surface, and maybe offset this a little bit, like an inch. And this will just kind of create some separation for that pad wall that's inside of it. So maybe we'll go through and apply some appearances to this. So I made 2 separate bodies here, so that's a little bit easier. So it looks like per this image, that's maybe just like powder coated white. So maybe under paint, we have smooth powder coat, white. There we go. I don't even have to do any editing. That's perfect. Just drop that on there. And then this, it is actually cardboard, and it is corrugated cardboard. So I might actually just use a powder coat to represent this, because it's just kind of a matte appearance. This rough powder coat will give it a little bit of a texture too. Now it's brown, so there's no brown option in here. So let's create it. I can just right click on that appearance and see if that's close enough. That looks a little bit more burgundy than brown. Now you can see once I've applied that appearance, if I start making adjustments to this menu, it'll actually represent itself on the object, which is really nice, rather than just kind of eyeballing it off of this menu. And that looks pretty good. I think that'll be good enough. And boom, there we go, right? Again, not perfect, but at least from a scale perspective, it's right on. And if I drop that now in my design, it will be kind of, again, perfect sizing for what we need. Now, I already have one of those created, so I'm going to pull from my list of furniture over here. And once I do have that object created, I can just start dragging and dropping and assembling things like Legos in here. So here we go. Now I have just this move command where I can drag and drop this object exactly where I want it to go. And this can be a little bit tedious doing it this way. And additionally, it's not very precise, right? Like, how do I know that I'm exactly touching that wall? And I know that I said precision isn't really a part of this project or a necessity in this project, but definitely ease of assembly and ease of kind of getting this thing done is uh, is definitely something to consider. So we do have some other tools in here that will help us with this job, and this align tool is definitely that. If you've ever used like Inventor or SolidWorks and you've used things like mates, this is very similar to that, but it doesn't lock down any motion. It just sets apart on a plane or on a point. So I'm going to select this wall and select the back of this pad wall here, and let me make sure that I selected what was appropriate. Try this again. There we go. And now you can see that those two surfaces are mated together. And from here, um, I think I can use this for reference again. Um, I believe I did measure this, and this corner here aligns perfectly with this second post. So I'm going to make that pretty darn close. I'm going to use this move tool now, and let's actually go through and select the component on the side here. And you see now I have this triad where I can move this object left and right, and now I know it's perfectly on that plane. So I'm going to make that just kind of break the center of that post. That looks pretty good. I'd like to also go through and add some more permanent structures, like this sink is another one that they said can't be moved. So let's drop this in. Let's make sure it's in the right orientation. Thankfully with this sink, I drew it with these bottom legs actually sitting on the ground. So I should say sitting on the origin that also this floor plane is intersecting. So when I drop it in, I know it's perfectly on the floor. That's another nice shortcut. This ended up marking the center of the room. Let's see if we can find another reference image. Perfect. It looks like it's butted all the way up against that wall. Say okay. That looks pretty good. And I think this fish tank was another one that they said they really didn't want to move. So you can see that this is starting to fill up pretty quick. And I've already broken one of my rules for going through and creating kind of subfolders or components for all of these different pieces. So you can imagine at this point where like I'm in discussion with the board and they're like, okay, we want to remove all three of these components. Can you show us that really quick? Well, now I have to go through and like click the visibility of all three of these things. Again, if I just have subcategories for all of these parts, like I have something called furniture, and all of that furniture is now contained inside of that single component. Now, if someone says like, hey, can I just look at the structure without actually seeing any of the furniture? Imagine there's 150 components in here at this point. I don't want to go through and then just click on the visibility of each one of those components. Now, very easily, I can just turn the visibility off of that. Now, of course, I could right click on that structure and say isolate, but this is, again, it's just kind of like subcategorizing everything the way that I'm showing here. At least for this project is definitely the way to do it. So let's keep adding some things in here. Now, it was the instance where this tray that I found, or I should say they found on a website. Initially, they said, you know what, I think we want the 6 foot version of this. If you wouldn't mind assembling it here, and we actually want 2 of these right next to each other. Can you show us what that would look like? And it did. That just happened to look something like this. And at this point, they could go through and say like, oh, you know what? There's actually a lot of space in between both of these, and I don't think we're going to have anybody walking in between this. Um, I can at least see now that, well, how many feet are between these 2 components here? So it looks like it's close to 3 feet. Um, you know what? Maybe we could do a different arrangement of this. Maybe we could do the 8 foot version of this and turn those 90 degrees and see what the orientation is of that. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that's pretty easy. So then I went through and just turned the visibility off for these. And maybe I even put those in their own subcategory for like 6 foot tray stands. So I could turn visibility of those on and off really quick. But then I was able to drag these 8 foot ones in here that I was able to see like, oh, okay, yeah, these will fit perfectly in between these posts, right? Let's create another one of these, copy it over, drag that into place. And now we can see like this now in relation to the other furniture in the room, which I have yet to create, how that is all going to scale and how people are going to interact and move about this workspace and how plumbing is going to look in between all of these connections. And that's what all of this is for, right? Like it's not supposed to be entirely exact, but it's supposed to give perspective for something that is too complex to just imagine or sketch out on a piece of paper. You can get a precision out of this that you just couldn't, again, if you were just building off of a napkin sketch. Or it would probably take you an equal amount of time, maybe even more time, and you just wouldn't get the same kind of visual benefits from it. So hiding this and kind of pulling up the more completed version of it, here we go. Again, you can see that this one is very similarly organized with my furniture, plumbing, and structure like we did that first one. Let's turn the roof off here so we can take a better look at what we've organized. And this is the ultimate layout that we ended up creating. So we ended up going back to these 6 foot beds. We ended up keeping some of the material that already existed in here, like one of these tables ended up being actually broken down and like, oh, could you actually build one of these and show us exactly what that would look like in the space? We've never actually put it together before. And oh, you know what? These can actually be set at different heights. We've never set the one that we do have built at a different height. Could you show us how that would be represented and how that would be scaled to the window that it's sitting next to? And again, that was really easy to do with a model like this. I was also able to draw on some plumbing here with 3D sketching. If you have some more questions about 3D sketching, I did a live stream a few weeks ago just about that. And this gave some reference as to just some general links for plumbing, exactly where things want to lie, and again, how that greenhouse grower can convey to the people on the board of like, hey, this is how this needs to be set up. So again, this has a lot of like visual value for a lot of people involved in this project. So how then do I share this with them, right? Ultimately, this was going to be done in a Zoom meeting, and yeah, I guess I could just share my screen in a Zoom meeting and rotate around this model. But Fusion has a very, very cool tool called the public link. And this has many, many different uses. But uh, this is something I think is really special. Um, Not only does this make it really easy to share files for download or just kind of represent ideas for someone, um, it's a really good way for people to interact with your model who just have no CAD experience. Um, I'm going to copy this, and maybe I can even put it in the chat live now. Let me see. Here, I'm going to paste this in the chat for you guys to view. So you can act like you are on the board with all of these people with me, and this is exactly what I sent them. So like, how amazing is this, right? Like, you're sitting at home in a Zoom meeting, and your expectations are that you're just going to watch somebody's webcam, but now you actually have this live model that you can move and interact with. Like, whoa, this is my greenhouse. This is pretty darn cool. I love this. I can now rotate around it and kind of see scale. I can look in the windows and see like, okay, yeah, this looks pretty good. I like this. From the design menu here, I can open up and just see the structure. I can just see plumbing. I can isolate the furniture and see exactly how all of that's laid out. Or I can go back to this top level. Now, something really cool where you're building something for like the human scale, there is this first person view. And I think that this is amazing. I'm a kind of a video game junkie, and this satisfies that, where you now have basically video game controls. Um, I'm going to say, okay, I got it. And I can lower myself into the space and imagine that I am a average size human now. And I can use my mouse to now walk around this space and look around. Like, okay, yeah, you know what? There's plenty of space for me to actually clear through these aisles. Okay, I'm over at the sink. Cool. Yep, this all looks good. We have spacing here in between the sink and these pillars. You know what? There's actually going to be a pump right here for this fish tank. So, you know, that clearance looks pretty good. Maybe I actually need to go through and like move. Oops, sorry, selecting the wrong things here. Let's try that again. Turn my my measure tool off. Maybe I need to go through and see, oh, is the clearance between this okay? Well, you know what, if someone's going to be walking in between here and there's a piece of plumbing, is that a tripping hazard? I don't know. Let's see. Is there enough room in between these bins for me to get around? Yep, I think so. I think so. And from here, I was able to communicate with the board, and they would tell me like, okay, you know what, that's not the best place for that planter. We'd actually like it against that wall, and we're not going to have one of them. We're going to have three of them. So maybe you could represent that in the next model. You can also jump out of this first person view and go through and measure between surfaces too, right? I have these measuring tools built into this. I can also create cross sections from this. I can create exploded views, which is probably not what we want, but it's kind of comical. So we'll show it. You know, if there's some sort of blast that happened in the center of this building. But cross section views are pretty valuable in this case, where I can kind of cut the room in half or cut the front part of this off and see it from the center. Now I can kind of sneak in here and do some measurements if necessary. So yeah, the value of this share link is really incredible, right? Like, I don't know a better way of representing this project, especially in the context that I had to, than this arrangement. And yeah, that's really a lot of what I wanted to show you guys. I hope you guys see kind of the same value in this as what I did. Everyone else was wowed, and I know for their next project, they're hoping that I do something similar for them. But yeah, hopefully I get some questions from you guys in the comments. I'll go through and read through the chat after I'm done here and see if I can answer anything more. But I want to say thank you for having me, and everyone stay safe and stay excited, and we'll talk to you soon.